Hang on just a second, guys. I've got to get this screen fixed for everybody. I think we've got everybody introduced. We appreciate everything all of you do, and you do a lot of things that we don't know about in your local communities, and we hope that you know we're here for you if you need us. And with that, Jim, I'm going to let you introduce yourself while I get the screen to share. Okay. And we are thrilled to have Jim Hudson as the new executive director of the National Down Syndrome Congress.
Well, that's easy for Joanna to say since she was, on the search team that hired me or recommended that the board hired me. So she either gets credit to blame. We'll see how things go in a couple of years. But I am thrilled to be on this. For those of you guys who don't know me, prior to this role, I was the executive director of the Down Syndrome Association of Greater Cincinnati for the last 12 years. It was a great honor and privilege. And during that time, I dabbled, and we had some people who worked on advocacy and policy work, and I've made some Capitol Hill visits. But by no means am I a policy and advocacy expert, but I am a pretty good judge of effective teams. And during the interview process, even those first couple weeks, I have just grown my respect for our current policy team, 100-fold. We have a great team in place. This is a huge priority for NDSC, and not only in its history, but certainly will be into the future. And I love that we have a grassroots group like this, and literally hundreds, almost 1,000 of people around the country who are advocating for those we care about. So thanks for welcoming me. I'm sure many of you will be in Phoenix. Feel free to grab me by the shoulder, introduce yourself, tell me a little bit of your story. I'm sure I'll be running around all over the convention hall. So enjoy your meeting and look forward to seeing some of you soon.
Thank you, Jim. We appreciate it. And Jim has jumped in right at a really busy time. And he is just, it is great for us to have him on, and we appreciate his support of policy and advocacy. So, Ricky, we're going to start with Ricky Sabia with policy updates. Thank you.
I'm just waiting for the slide. Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so glad you all are here and glad to have Jim with us as well and a bunch of our staff members. So the first thing I'm going to talk about are the annual determinations on state implementation of IEDEA. I think many of you may have heard of this before. Every year, the Department of Education puts out letters and makes determinations on whether states are meeting the requirements of IDEA. So when they put this out, it's based on 2-year-old data. So for example, it's this 2024 determinations are based on 2022 data. And what they determine is whether your state met requirements or whether it needs assistance, and it's the first year they need assistance, or whether there's been 2 or more consecutive years that they need assistance. And then there's also needs intervention, but no states this year were in the needs intervention category. This link will get you to a map, and you can scroll down also and look at your states and see where they fall. They are going to be putting out specific letters about each states with more details that went into the determination in August. I also want to point out that one of the reasons, I know a lot of you are going to look at that and say, well, how could my state, have met requirements because, they're doing a terrible job for kids like my child. And a lot of the reason for that is the way the determinations are made. And, NDSC, along with others for a very long time, has been commenting on the way in which these determination letters are done and what they focus on and what they don't focus on, more importantly, and the way it doesn't get down to students who take alternate assessments or students with intellectual disabilities who, their data doesn't look anywhere near like, for example, as if you look at all students with disabilities. And so we've been constantly doing comments everywhere we see the possibility to do comments. And in fact, there is another opportunity that's due on Monday having to do with equity and data for across all agencies with the government. So please know that we are out here just advocating every which way we can to try to change the way the data is looked at and states are monitored. Next slide. So here's some more information on the annual determination so that you know. If they only needed assistance for 1 year, there's not anything that really happens. But if they need assistance for 2 or more consecutive years, and note that's consecutive, so not 1 year and then they met requirements and then another year they need assistance. It has to be 2 consecutive years. Then the department is required to take an enforcement action. And some of these are requiring the state to access technical assistance. So for example, we have many of you know about the TIE Center on Inclusion for Students with Significant Cognitive Disabilities was a technical assistance center. There are many technical assistance centers that can provide them with information to improve what they're doing for students with disabilities, or they can direct the state to use IDA funds. They've got these set-aside funds to use for administrative purposes, and they can direct the state to use those funds in specific areas where the state needs assistance in these letters. And there's a bullet. See, I already forgot I had that bullet in there, that we've been advocating for a very long time to provide more accountability for students to take alternate assessments. And also there is no focus, there's focus on LRE for general purposes, but for purposes of this particular IDA meeting requirements and those determinations, there's really no focus on LRE. And so those are 2 things we're really pushing on. Next slide. So another thing we want to talk about, and some of you were involved in the first one I did, is I've been hosting, well, NDSC has been hosting, but I've been the one speaking on quarterly education deep dives. And these are webinars for, and not so much presentations only, but also interaction for NDAC members who have a strong foundational knowledge in education policy. So this isn't just 101. This is for really, that's why it's called deep dives, for people who want more in-depth information for local, state, and federal advocacy. And the first session was in May, and it was on the 1% cap that dictates the number of students in assessed grades who are permitted to participate in an alternate assessment in your state, which is approximately 10% of students with disabilities. And we talked about where that came from and what that means and the waiver process, because there's a provision, general provision in the Every Student Succeeds Act that allows the secretary to provide waivers of all kinds of things. And they have been using that provision to allow states to waive the cap. And there have been some states that have been violating the cap without a waiver. And, some of the problems with this and what people can do in their states to find this data and to push their state. And, if they did submit a waiver request, there's data in those waiver requests that can help them advocate at the state level. So that's the kind of depth I'm talking about. And we're also trying to form a conversation among these NDAC members across states who really want to work at this level, and they can help each other because there are a lot of people who are already working at the state level and they can assist each other, and that's part of the purpose. So the next deep dive is expected to be in September, and just look out for an announcement about the date and topic for that one. Next slide, please. So another thing that we're doing, which is relatively new, are NDSC education briefs. We've been developing these briefs for a while, but we format them and decide on topics and edit them. And so these will be released at some point after the convention, but I can tell you the first 4 topics are the importance of state assessment and a discussion of alternate assessments. So this is sort of a 101 on, why are assessments important and what is an alternate assessment. And then there is one, I'm not quite yet done. And, oh, there you go. And another is on the intersection of the Elementary and Secondation Act Education Act, nicknamed ESSA, for Every Student Succeeds Act, and IDEA, including tips for IEP advocacy, because a lot of people know IDEA, but they don't know what ESSA says that can support what you're doing in your IEP. Then there's one on a guidance on early childhood inclusion that came out recently. And then the fourth one is on assistive technology devices and services and what these terms mean and how to advocate for them. So those will be the first four. Next slide. Okay, and the other thing we just wanted to bring to your attention are a couple of recent guidance documents. So the first one is actually the one that is the subject of the third brief, and that talks about expectations for inclusion in high quality early childhood programs, which is very important that the Department of Education get out there and talk about how this isn't happening and this needs to happen. And then also setting the expectation that this inclusion continues when the students transition into elementary school. And there's a lot of information in this guidance that's very helpful. And like I said, that brief will be about that. And then another guidance is on general supervision of the states. The states have general supervision responsibilities for the local education agencies or districts. And so this one gets into how to ensure that they do appropriate monitoring, provide technical assistance, and it talks about the importance of general supervision and expectation of the monitoring. And that's, again, a place, this general supervision, where we've talked a lot to the Department of Education and submitted comments on the importance of focusing not just on all students with disabilities, but also on these groups of kids that really their data is not as good and they get swept under the rug. So, okay.
I'm next talking about inclusive post-secondary education. My name is Stephanie Smith-Lee, and I'm going to give you an update on the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act and some issues that we're particularly interested in. We've talked before about the Higher Education Act being reauthorized, and it's certainly not happening this Congress. It's anybody's guess if that'll happen next Congress or not. And that has impact on the inclusive post-secondary programs for students with intellectual disabilities. I'll give you a brief update on where we are with accrediting programs for students with ID in college and share some information about the upcoming State of the Art Conference. Next slide. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, was passed in 2014, and it's past time to reauthorize the bill. Not much is happening or getting passed in Congress right now, as you might have noticed, but there is a chance that we might get a reauthorization of WIOA. The House passed their bill in April by a large margin, and the Senate Help Committee is currently working on a bipartisan draft of the bill, which is great that both Republicans and Democrats are working together on that. The Help Committee staff invited a small group of us for a briefing on their draft bill, which was a great opportunity to see what they're considering. And then they gave us an opportunity to provide written comments on that. We worked very closely with AUCD and with Kim at Autism Society on these issues, and we've submitted comments to the Help Committee requesting some definition language that would clarify that students with ID in post-secondary programs may receive vocational rehabilitation, VR services, supports, and funding. This is a topic you've heard us talk about now for years, and we have made progress. There are more states that are providing tuition and other types of pre-ETs or other services, but there are still states and regions within states that say we can't do that. So we want to have more clarification in the law about that. We also have recommended that they include the Transformation to Competitive Integrated Employment Act, TC. Transformation Competitive Integrated Employment Act as part of their workforce package that they hopefully will be considering this year. Next. We've talked before on our calls about accreditation for inclusive post-secondary programs. This is something that we've been working on for a very long time. I chaired the Think College Accreditation Work Group for 10 years. We developed model program standards for accreditation. We now have created an accrediting agency and have started accrediting programs. The Western Carolina University UP program has been accredited. Recently, the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs Inclusive Services was accredited, and the accrediting agency is now considering the Virginia Commonwealth University ACIT in college program for accreditation. And this is a very important step for us in having meaningful accountability as well as improved quality for programs for students with ID in college. So it's been a long time coming, but it's exciting that we're beginning to get there. Next. I wanted to share with you information about the state-of-the-art conference on inclusive post-secondary education and individuals with intellectual disability. There's also a student leadership conference for students and recent graduates. This is a conference that NDSC is very pleased to co-sponsor and help organize every year. This year it's going to be in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And we've included the link here in case you'd like to register or submit award nominations. And I think that's the last one for me, and I'm going to turn it over to Heather.
Okay. Hi, everyone. For those that have been watching the news, reading the news, generally not living under a rock, recently, there's been a lot of talk about the U.S. Supreme Court overturning the Chevron case. And so what this means is throughout the presentation, we've been talking about how we submit guidance to federal agencies. We ask for different clarifications. The way this usually works is that a law is, a law is passed through Congress, and there are always some ambiguity in it. And the Chevron case, which was held, back in the early 80s, set up a precedent saying that regulations that are passed by federal agencies would take precedence over, they would essentially have the effect of law. And so we've been dependent on this for many, many years. There have been very good things for our community that have come out of this. In the past, we may have asked you to submit comments for regulations and guidance, which is even less binding. Well, unfortunately, the Supreme Court has now said that the Chevron case no longer applies, and that essentially the force of regulations from federal agencies is not going to be nearly as strong as it was prior to this ruling. That this is saying that when there is an ambiguity in the law, the judges need to, a case will be brought and the judge gets to determine what that ambiguity means. So, it's definitely put a lot of concern into, our work and the disability community. Let's go to the next slide. We typically feel like we have a big voice, particularly when regulations are published. There's always a 60 or 90-day period for public comment. We've shared that with you. We've shared some sample public comments before. Agencies are still going to possibly put out regulations, but as I said, they are not going to have the force that they have had in the past. So we're just kind of waiting and seeing. There's nothing that we can do about this right now. We suspect that there already have been quite a few court cases filed now, just since this ruling was brought down, a few days ago. We suspect that there will be a lot of different court cases getting at those ambiguities and trying to turn back some of those regulations that were made. Just some examples, with the Affordable Care Act, the regulation just came out saying that that you can't discriminate against pre-existing conditions, not just in healthcare, but anything having, in the federal government that has to do with healthcare. We've talked about the HCBS settings rule. Well, that's a regulation. There are many regulations in IDEA. As Stephanie said, we're trying to get clarification as to whether they will cover VR funds. So, as I said, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of concern, but we just wanted to let you know what is going on. Going into the next Congress, it's become apparent that certain details that are typically not spelled out in pieces of legislation are going to have to be filled in, so that we don't have to rely on judges to make an interpretation. So that may slow down the process even more. Let's go to the next slide. So in addition to the Chevron deference case being overturned, there's also been a lot of talk lately about Project 2025 in the media. This is something that's been out for a while. The Heritage Foundation put it out. It's a very conservative think tank. And if you haven't had a chance to read this, I would suggest going to read it. For us in the disability community, representing people with disabilities, there are many, many concerns that we have based on this plan. I named a few here. Medicaid, it's talking about, doing block grants, per capita caps, lifetime caps. The ACA, Affordable Care Act, they want to, repeal or replace it. Privatizing Social Security and making it harder to qualify. SNAP and other public benefits, they're going to institute mandatory work requirements. And this seems, we've talked a lot about how we have interaction with the Department of Education and that they do a lot of monitoring and really push for accountability. Unfortunately, under Project 2025, they would outright, abolish the Department of Education as we know it now, and move the Office of Civil Rights to the Department of Justice. So this is on our radar. Again, there's nothing that we can do about it. It depending on which news source you listen to, it either is or is not the Trump agenda. And we certainly don't, endorse or, speak negatively or positively about, any particular candidate. We're very bipartisan, but just wanted to put this on your radar as well, showing some impact that it could have on people with disabilities. And if this project is enacted in whole or in part, you can bet that the NDSC policy team will be out there advocating for people with disabilities to make sure that we don't lose all of these services. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the current congressional landscape. Congress is almost over. Elections are in November. The Congress ends in December, and then the 119th Congress, the new Congress, will start in January. What typically happens in this last quarter, it's kind of a mad dash to the finish. Things, very much are stalled. They're just trying to get end of year packages in. As Stephanie had mentioned before, we are a bit optimistic that a work package, will go through Congress. We're not sure if the Transformation Act will be part of it. On top of that, we know that there's a lot of low approval ratings for the president and Congress, and that Congress is bitterly divided and control hangs in the balance. So really, depending on what the outcome of the election is for both the president and the House and the Senate, that is going to really, dictate what the policy agenda will be, and, whether Project 2025 will be enacted in whole or in part. So right now, too, the appropriations are continuing and there's an end of year tax package. A lot of the bills that we're advocating for, you can go to the next page, are stalled, not as a surprise. That does not mean that we should stop advocating for them. It just means that we need to take this opportunity to reach out and educate our members of Congress and tee these up for next session. All of the bills listed here are ones that we at NDSC have really prioritized. We have open action alerts on all of them. They are still good. I recommend, just taking a couple minutes and going through the list on our website and submitting those action alerts. We've heard from many of the members of Congress and their staffs that they are planning on reintroducing certain of these bills next session. Of course, the makeup of Congress might look different. So stay tuned for that, but we're certainly not giving up on these issues. As we always say, advocacy is a marathon, not a sprint. So education is really, really key, and teeing these things up for next session. Let's go to the next slide. So vote, vote, vote. I can't say it enough. Encourage everyone to vote. Self-advocates should absolutely be voting too. And we are going to be putting on an election a webinar in October, just talking, again, not endorsing any particular candidates, but just talking about certain things that you can ask candidates for elected office to determine whether or not they align with you on disability policy. If you haven't registered to vote, please do. Please share that on social media. Encourage everyone to vote. And when we do the election webinar, we will, absolutely talk a little bit more about the accommodations that need to be made and what to do if accommodations are not being made on election day. Okay, so it is now time to turn to our speakers. So many of you may be familiar that there is a very strong link between Down syndrome and autism. There's a official dual diagnosis, which hovers around 18 to 20% of people with Down syndrome have autism spectrum disorder. Doctors actually believe that this is a higher number because of what they call diagnostic overshadowing, where medical professionals just see the Down syndrome and often don't dig deeper to see if the person is on the spectrum. There's also a lot of traits that people with Down syndrome and autism share. There's a lot of families that are grappling with a dual diagnosis for their loved ones. They often express that they don't feel like they fit in either of the communities. So just wanted to make you aware of the Down syndrome autism connection. It's a group specifically for families that have this dual diagnosis. We work very closely with a lot of other disability organizations. Almost everything that's good for, people with autism is good for people with Down syndrome. And we, rely on certain colleagues and partners, such as the Autism Society of America, to take the lead on certain autism specific bills that absolutely will have a positive impact on the Down syndrome community as well when they are passed. So that's why we have some speakers from the Autism Society today. Just to introduce them, Kim Musheno is the Vice President of Public Policy at the Autism Society of America, which is the national organization representing a network of 70 affiliates dedicated to providing supports and services to people with autism and their families. She has over 25 years of experience working in Washington on disability policy, is a past chair of the Consortium for Citizens with Disabilities, and previously worked for the Association of University Centers on Disabilities. And the NDSC policy team has worked with Kim for many, many, many years, and we always appreciate the high level of collaboration that we have. We also have Gyasi Burks-Abbott here. He is a faculty member of the LEND program, which is the Leadership Education in Neurodevelopmental and Related Disabilities. If you haven't researched a LEND program in your area, you really should. These are programs that are great for all people with IDD, not just autism. Gyasi serves on the boards, committees, and commissions of many autism and disability organizations, and he's written for several publications. Gyasi graduated from Macalester College in St. Paul, Minnesota, and also from Simmons University in Boston. Gyasi tells the story of how he became an autism self-advocate in his autobiography titled My Mother's Apprentice and Autistic's Rites of Passage. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our friends at the Autism Society to talk about the Autism Cares Act and how we can join forces with them to help get this bill over the finish line.
Thanks, Heather. And Gyasi, can you join me on camera? There he is. And Gyasi has been very involved with the Autism Society on numerous advisory councils, including our strategic plan and our Justice Center at the Autism Society. So thank you for having me. Really happy to be here. As Heather said, our policy teams work together often, including a few years ago, we did a joint webinar on the dual diagnosis of autism and Down syndrome. But today we were invited to talk about the Autism CARES Act, which is a law that has been around since 2006. The reason for this law was that many parents were really concerned about the rising number of those with autism. Next slide, please. Which is now 1 in 36. And so these parents came and they educated their members of Congress and said, we are really concerned that we don't have a lot of programs or services and supports to support our loved ones. Since then, we now have a lot of people with autism who are involved in advocating for this law. Originally, it was called the Combating Autism Act, signed by President Bush. And again, the reason for this was to have a coordinated federal response to the rising numbers. Mainly, what it does is it amends the Public Health Services Act, and it authorized additional funding for a number of federal agencies that were already working on autism and intellectual developmental disabilities, but this law asked those agencies to do more. So, for example, the NIH was provided additional funding to better understand autism. What's the underlying biology and molecular and neurological underpinnings? Like, how does it interact? How does it interact with genetic makeup and things of that nature? Next. It authorized provided additional funding for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which does a lot of work in surveillance of autism and other developmental disabilities. It supports the what's called the Autism and Developmental Disabilities Monitoring Network. So again, not just autism, but also other developmental disabilities. It supports the Centers for Autism and Developmental Disabilities Research and Epidemiology, or CADRA network, which are regional centers of excellence doing all kinds of research on evidence-based practices, for example. It also provides funding for the Learn the Signs Act Early program. If you haven't heard of this, it's a really important program that helps parents, the public, doctors, and other health providers identify what's going on really early so that the screening, diagnosis, and treatment can start as early as possible. Again, for not just autism, but for all developmental disabilities. The Autism CARES Act says its purpose is to screen, diagnose, or rule out autism and other neurodevelopmental disabilities. It also is responsible for other prevention activities, like doing research into prevention of drowning and suicide prevention. Next. And then at another agency, the Health Resources Services Administration, or HRSA, the law authorized increased efforts to train health care providers and other professionals to screen, diagnose, or rule out autism and other neurodevelopmental disabilities, and to increase evidence-based interventions. Next. So, two of these networks under HRSA are what was discussed earlier, the leadership education and neurodevelopmental and related disabilities, or LEND programs, and the developmental behavioral pediatrics training program, or DBP. The autism intervention research to develop on physical aspects of health and other developmental disabilities, to find out what's going on and what can we do to help people in real world who are having physical health issues related to their disabilities. And then another network looking at behavioral and how we help those individuals. And Gyasi is actually at a LEND program in Boston, Massachusetts, as a faculty member. Gyasi, can you describe the importance of LEND and why, which is one of the reasons why the Autism Cares Act is so important to be reauthorized?
Thank you, Kim. I'll be happy to, actually, and I want to thank the National Down Syndrome Conference for inviting us. And one thing I really appreciate about being here today was hearing the policy update and taking a deep dive into disability policy, which is one thing that I was really attracted to when I was a LEND fellow back in 2018-19, because I was diagnosed with autism in the 90s. I'm now in my 50s. But and I had sort of been involved with advocacy work a little bit and research, but I never got as much policy background as I did when I was a LEND fellow. And what's significant about the LEND fellowship, which I see now as a faculty member, what I saw as a fellow, is it's an immersion in disability, and not just the science of different disabilities, including autism and Down syndrome, but also the history of the disability, right? Culture, intersectionality with other conditions, like, for instance, LGBTQ and people of color. But it's also interdisciplinary. Fellows come from many different disciplines. They're occupational therapists, excuse me, physical therapists, psychology grad students, law students, medical students, and also family fellows, which means fellows who have a family member with a disability, and lived experience or self-advocate fellows, which means fellows with a disability. And of course, these categories can be intermixed. And but also it's a very practical experience too, which is not only is a deep dive into public policy, which actually we travel every year to. The capstone experience is traveling to DC every year at the end of the fellowship program to advocate for disability legislation that has a personal meaning to us. But also during the year, there's the weekly lectures. There's volunteer work with community-based organizations. And in fact, a lot of our alumni have actually gone on to found their own community-based organizations based on needs that they've seen in their communities, like, for instance, in the immigrant community and in other communities. And then there's also the clinic visits, where we get to watch patients being evaluated in the clinic. And then there are the family visits, in which we go out and we get to see people outside of the clinic and get to learn about their lives, either in person or via Zoom, and just talk to them about their lives. And it's a very well-rounded experience. And I think it's very important, because not only is research on autism important, but also training healthcare professionals to deal with people with disabilities. And this is a very big part of that, because we're training future healthcare professionals who will go out there. Some of them are in training now, but this will be part of their future. So that's part of the significance.
Thanks, Gyasi. And then finally, there's the law authorizes an interagency coordinating committee, and they're meeting right now as we speak, a few blocks away from me here in Rockville. And this committee coordinates all the efforts of the federal agencies that are working on autism and other developmental disabilities. And these are all online and recorded. And there's a lot of interesting conversations. I mean, it's the one place where you get the Department of Education and CMS and Labor and now Housing and Urban Development, all the agencies that are working on autism are invited to come to this committee and talk about their efforts. And so it's been it's always very interesting. And I think I think many of you would find it interesting as well. The makeup includes federal and non-federal members. So I believe there's 6 members. So
Self-advocates.
I believe, and 6 parent members, and then 6 research members. Next. So all of this is what Joss and I were just talking about is could be lost if this is not reauthorized or renewed this year by September 30th. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But first, the Autism Society of America put together recommendations that we sent to all members of Congress to make some improvements. Even though the law is great the way it is, there's always room for improvements. We also put together recommendations along with our colleagues at the Consortium for Constituents with Disabilities. So some of those include increasing the number of centers of excellence to include one that would focus on interventions for those with more complex medical and behavioral support needs. That's those basically with autism and co-occurring developmental disabilities. Could be epilepsy, it could be Down syndrome, could be other complex medical needs that require some more support. And many families are telling us, and I'm seeing it, that are not getting their needs met. And then the other one would focus on premature mortality. We also asked for the recommendations to investigate and to find out why there's not enough developmental pediatricians in the country. I think there's like 600 for the entire country, and we need to figure out why aren't people wanting to get into training for this type of work. And then we asked for a new autism intervention research network to focus on communication needs, in particular augmentative and alternative communication, or AAC. Next. So those are just some of our recommendations, and where we are now is that Representative Chris Smith and Henry Cuellar are the bipartisan champions in the House, and a bill HR 7213 was recently unanimously approved by the Energy and Commerce Committee. Unanimously meaning all members of the committee voted to approve it, 42-0, and that's really good news in the House. The House bill contains some of our recommendations that I just told you about, so we're really pleased with the bill. And most of the disability community that I'm aware of is supporting the bill. I don't know of any organizations that have opposed it, which is really great news, because that's what you need when you 30 deadline and a Congress that Heather talked about, and in the middle of a election year coming up. So we need this to move quickly. So we're going to be asking for the House leadership to pass this bill with a suspension of the rules. In other words, if there is no opposition, just pass it without taking time on the House floor. On the Senate side, go back, please. On the Senate side, we don't have a bill yet. Can you go back a couple? We don't have a Senate bill yet, but we know that Chairman of the Help Committee, Senator Sanders, is working on with other members of the Senate in a bipartisan fashion to draft a bill, and we hope for that to be introduced soon. Next. So we have an online action center, just like I believe that your organization does, where we have an action alert that it's set up so that you can write to your member of Congress right now and ask them to co-sponsor this bill in the House, because that's what we need right now. We need as many co-sponsors as possible. Right now we have 40, but we need at least 140 for the House to consider suspending the rules and passing it without taking floor time. And we make this very easy. When they send out the slides, the Action Center will be a link. But you can just Google Autism Society Action Center, and that will get you there too. And we would love for your help with that. Heather also mentioned the election coming up. So I just wanted to point out that we have an election center that makes it really easy to find out who the candidates are in your community. All you have to do is put in your zip code, and it makes it really easy to find out who the candidates are, where to register to vote, and where to vote. And go back one. So that's it. I'm happy to take as much time as needed to answer any of your questions, and I'm sure Gyasi is too.
There's a question in the chat. Someone wants to know if there's a CBO score tied to it.
There definitely, I don't know if there's a CBO score, but we definitely know about how much is spent, and I can send that information separately when we send out the slides.
And thank both of you. We have a few more slides to get through. We're going to race through those, and then we'll stay on for questions. And please continue to put your questions in the chat, and we'll try to help answer those. And we will post the Autism Society's action alert in the NDAC group too, Kim. And that was excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to try to race through these things real quick. I just want to see where we are on NDAC membership. We went over 900 members in just the last couple of weeks, which is amazing. But we do have 13 states where we do not have self-advocate members. We have put this in newsletters, and we put it in the NDAC group, and we send it to you. If you are in any of these states or know a person with Down syndrome in any of these states that you think might be interested in joining NDAC, I would love to be introduced to them. And we had a kind of rough start because we had some technology issues. I think I failed to introduce myself. I think I know most of you, but I'm Jawanda Mass, the Grassroots Advocacy Manager for the National Down Syndrome Congress. And we're going to race. Anybody coming to the NDSC convention, come to boot camp or send your friends. If you aren't going to be at convention, send your friends. Trust us. We put 18 hours into 3.5, and we have a great agenda. You can see some of those people right there, and we're very excited. We're most excited about our role plays that feature almost all self-advocates. And this year, they're going to teach you how to give testimony. And it will be very entertaining, rest assured. We will also be having an NDAC OSEP town hall at the NDSC convention. Most years we have a town hall or something like that. Last year was with Glenna Gallo-Wright. This year we are so pleased to have back with us Valerie C. Williams, the director of OSEP, and many of you know her because she is mom to a young man with Down syndrome, and she was the vice president of the NDSC board. This will be a guided conversation that Stephanie Lee and self-advocate Hannah LaCour out of Louisiana, who is on this call, are going to be interacting, or they'll have some questions that our NDAC members have actually submitted that we sifted through and put questions together to ask her. Great opportunity to be able to spend some time with Valerie. We also are going to have an informal NDAC meetup at convention. It is going to be on Thursday night, July 25th from 8 to 10 p.m. at 26 Bar on the lower level of the JW Marriott there. So we hope if you're in town that you'll come and join us for that. It will be great fun. I did, before I leave convention, I did promise to share anybody coming to convention or know people in the Phoenix area. We could use more volunteers for kids camp. You'll be able to find that information on our website, and we also have some social media posts going out on that in the morning. So if any of you know people who might want to volunteer in Phoenix, we would appreciate that. These are just informational things. You're going to get these slides. So, we went out of that into something else. Sorry about that. We will, as I said, we will be sending these to the slides and the video to you. We did have one change. Our next NDAC call is going to be on October 16th and not on October 9th. We apologize for that. We will be having that voting webinar for anybody. You do not have to be an NDAC member, and we encourage you to encourage people to join that, watch for information. But our next call has been moved from the 9th to the 16th. You all know how to find us. This is our social media. This is our public policy agenda, which will be changing here in a few months as we get a new Congress. And this is how you contact all of us.